In late 2019, President Donald Trump signed a bill creating the United States Space Force. It's the first new branch of the armed services in more than 70 years. The Space Force is so new, not much is known about the mission of the Guardians. Well, CBN News reporter Mark Martin traveled to Colorado Springs to bring us this firsthand look.
The United States military plays a key role in protecting this country and world on the ground, water, and in the air. Now it's taking that mission to a new and even more vast frontier.
Space is becoming more and more important to the entire world. And the Space Force is here to protect our American interests and to preserve freedom in space.
Today, space is essential not only to our way of life, it's absolutely critical to the modern way of war. GPS, ATMs, cell phones, gas pumps, traffic lights, power grids.
I'm here on the ops floor of the 22 Space Operations Squadron, and the map behind me shows 7 remote tracking stations, which are equipped with antennas to enable space access.
We facilitate everything from space launch to disposition of end-of-life satellites, and everything in between.
Major General Sean Bratton oversees the Space Training and Readiness Command. He sees this new branch as critical to America's future.
We've always flown these spacecraft. We didn't just invent them all with the stamp of the Space Force. We flew them as part of the Air Force. But there's been change recently. We've really seen potential adversaries move into the space domain, begin to threaten our capabilities. And I think that drove Congress to think through and finally decide to enact or create a new service specifically focused on the space domain.
The service's uses of its spacecraft include communication, GPS, and more military-specific needs.
The missile warning spacecraft, for example, so we can look and observe missile launches around the world, primarily to warn the joint force.
Bratton confirms the greatest threats in this arena are China and Russia.
Both have considerable space capability. We see them testing weapons now in the space domain, which is new behavior in the past kind of 10 to 15 years. And so I think that gives us cause for caution and causes us to really think about how do we protect and defend our capabilities in space.
Brad Bowman serves as Senior Director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He says the space domain is hotly contested.
Even as China and Russia are fielding capabilities, combat capabilities in space to take out our satellites, they're simultaneously trying to take steps at the United Nations to bind our ability or to constrain, limit, reduce into our ability to do the same thing. It's good old Soviet hypocrisy at its best.
Lieutenant Colonel Brian Day oversees around 400 Space Force Guardians and government civilians operating close to 30 military communication satellites.
Whether it be operations in the European theater, the Pacific theater, in the Middle East, we're supplying all of the communications to ensure that all of those soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians that are in harm's way have absolutely uninterrupted communications to execute their mission.
Part of the training here focuses on enhanced technical education. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Durand is the provost of the National Security Space Institute, which incorporates virtual reality and augmented reality into the curriculum.
Allow students to have more of a hands-on approach to what is inside of a satellite. What does it look like? What do orbits look like?
This virtual reality simulator allows the students to move in orbit. It helps them to visualize what actually happens when they send commands to a real-life satellite from the Earth.
I also got to try my hands at augmented reality.
So like in a class, you can just expand it, you can contract it, you can look at the different dimensions of it. Basically, it causes the coursework to come alive.
Exactly.
Another aspect of preparing Guardians involves taking part in war game simulations.
If they do not have the opportunity to face a threat in a training environment, when they have to meet the real threat, they're not going to be as equipped.
Master Sergeant Joshua Mauser showed us a representation of what's called a direct ascent anti-satellite missile.
That is literally just a missile that is launched from the ground with the intention of striking an object that is orbiting in a low Earth orbit. It's a very serious threat.
Space Force Weapons Officer Captain Mike Foley describes the space domain as constantly evolving.
As the world gets more interested in returning to the moon, landing astronauts again on the lunar surface, That adds a whole new layer of complexity to the space domain, where now we're not just worried about our geosynchronous satellites in orbit, we're worried about the space all the way out to the moon.
And when you think of the moon, astronauts might come to mind, but don't confuse NASA with the Space Force.
NASA is the science side of things, if you will, the exploration. Our job is to protect and defend the domain, so that includes NASA.
The Space Force motto is Semper Supra, which means always above. And as space plays a growing role in everyday life, it becomes clear of the need for a military to keep its eyes on what's above in order to secure our freedom. Mark Martin, CBN News, Colorado Springs, Colorado.
I used to hope we would leave our weapons here on Earth as we started to explore space. We would leave them all behind. Apparently, I was quite naive in that. When you look at it, and other nations starting to weaponize in space, well, then that just forces us into an arms race. And it truly is the high ground. Anyone who's ever studied military tactics, if you have the high ground, you have an absolute advantage. And space is the ultimate high ground.